I'll be honest, I'm quite surprised by the overall rating of the magical Legend of the Leprechauns on IMDb, because before I watched this, I didn't have high hopes despite the cast, which I will talk about in a moment. And after I watched it, I thought, great soundtrack, the music was brilliant, some of the special effects were okay, the costumes were okay, but generally I didn't think it was amazing. I felt like the pacing was a little bit off, it was a little bit clunky. So to have 7 out of 10 across over 4,000 reviews and ratings is very impressive. I don't know how many people are reviewing that from a nostalgic perspective, because a lot of the criticism I've read about it online, and criticism isn't the right word, a lot of the comments I've read about it are from people fondly remembering it from their childhood, rather than people reviewing it for the first time as an adult, which is what I'm doing. I love the story of the Banshee, and the way that the Grand Banshee fits into this, I think is fascinating, and it does encompass a lot of kind of Irish mythology and folklore. So if you're interested in that, it's something that you will find fairly interesting. And I will actually talk a little bit about the narrative itself in a moment, but I'll just thought I'd say the reason that I wanted to watch this was because of Whoopi Goldberg. I love Whoopi Goldberg. I decided to go and try and find a film of hers that I hadn't seen before. This one caught my eye because it didn't seem like the kind of film that she would do. By which I mean it's not the kind of film I've seen her in before. So I thought I'd check it out, and the cast is amazing. Randy Quaid, Whoopi Goldberg, Roger Daltrey, Zoe Wanamaker, I could go on, Philadelphia Law, Peter Serafinowicz. I'll stop. There are plenty other names in this that are notable, that are brilliant, and the acting across the board is great. Maybe great's too strong a word on some occasions, but generally the acting is fine. I've got no issues with that at all. But this itself, and it is quite long because it was released as a TV miniseries, but when I watched it in one lump sum, back to back. But when I watched it, I kind of thought, this is not good. I just didn't gel with any of the characters or the narrative itself. There were certain aspects, as I said, I like learning about Irish mythology or finding out more about the Banshee and how it fits in with folklore. And I think they told those stories well within the narrative. But the actual narrative about this American businessman holidaying in Ireland and being introduced to all of these Irish mythologies and characters, it sounded like it could have been interesting, but I just don't think it worked as well as what I was hoping. I think maybe it's a little bit too cliche and a little bit too cheesy at times. If this had been done as a serious film, then maybe it could have been quite fascinating. I think if it had been darker, it would have been fascinating. But it is a family film, it's rated PG. It couldn't have been too dark. But I think, for me, it was just a little bit too flippant, I think is the word I'm looking for. And I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe you'll understand what I mean by that. I think, as a child, I might have loved it. But as an adult, even though it's a family film, I just found that the narrative didn't flow very well. I didn't really care for any of the characters. I wasn't emotionally invested in certain relationships that sparked. Visually, yes. I think visually it's very good. It's very well directed. I'm not entirely sure who directed it, but I will find that out now. But visually it's stunning. The music, as I said, is great. It's directed by John Henderson, written by Peter Barnes. The characters are not that fascinating. They look great. The costumes are brilliant. Visually, it is a great film. But the narrative, and for me, as a person who is driven by narrative, I was just expecting something better based on the description. Maybe not better based on what I'd read about it, because as I said, most of what I'd read seemed to be from people who were remembering it fondly. And I'd love to know what you think of it if you watched it as a child and then have maybe seen it again as an adult. I had never seen it before, so I have no nostalgia for it. But did your opinion change? Was it different? The Magical Legend of the Leprechauns is one that I would recommend if you're a big fantasy fan. I'm not a big fantasy fan, but I obviously appreciate fantasy. Or if you're a big fan of any of the cast. I'm glad I've seen it, because I wanted to see Whoopi Goldberg in something. And I'm glad I could enjoy the beautiful scenery, some lovely architecture, the very nice soundtrack. But unfortunately the narrative just didn't appeal to me in the way that I had hoped.